My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, I talked to Mark about West Marches games, running DM courses, and of course about Game Master Engine, a 3D virtual tabletop. Welcome everybody. Today I have Mark, the community manager for Game Master Engine. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, nice to be here.
Nice to meet you as well. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the tabletop role-playing space?
Well, long stories. So actually, I started with tabletop role-playing. I think I grew up with stuff like Eye of the Beholder on the Amiga and this kind of very old D&D like computer games. And I always had a fascination for role-playing games and for fantasy specifically. And then I started playing when I was about 15 or so. I started playing I'm from Germany, so I started playing one German copycat thing basically of D&D, which is called Auge, the Black Eye. I don't know if that's popular or not. But we played that only for a little bit of time. Then I didn't play tabletop games for a long time, but played a lot of other fantasy stuff and did a lot of other fantasy stuff creatively and this kind of stuff. And then came back to D&D, I don't know, 7 years ago or so, and then really started getting into it. Started off right as a game master, and yeah, haven't stopped since. So
And what system do you primarily play in nowadays?
nowadays, I primarily play in D&D 5, though a lot of stuff that I play is heavily homebrewed, because I think D&D 5 is a great system if you tweak it, and it's great to tweak. It's easy to tweak, you know. Mm. But of course, there's other systems for specific stuff that you want to do, which might be better for that specific stuff. I like the versatility of D&D 5 in
And
that way.
what kind of tweaks do you make to your game?
So, for example, often we play adaptations of other franchises and stuff. So then you would tweak the content actually. So a friend of mine ran a Naruto style game and then tweaked this accordingly. Another friend of mine ran a Final Fantasy D&D 5 game and we tweaked that accordingly. Another friend of mine started a Harry Potter version of D&D 5, which I wrote a lot of spells for, which was actually very fun. So yeah, that's the one thing, these franchises. And then the other thing is I play a lot in so-called West Marches games or pool games, where there's like maybe 5 to 15 dungeon masters and 20 to 100 players, maybe more. And that's super cool, but that needs heavy tweaking for sure. Because D&D 5 is not made for that. It's made for campaigns.
I've talked about West Marches a little bit in the past, and one of the things I think for any system with the West Marches game is you almost need a lot of downtime systems and a lot
Yes.
of systems that help coordinate the game masters and the players outside of the actual
Yes.
system that's being used to be played.
Yeah.
Do you run some of those games?
Yes. So I run a West Marches server right now. I used to run a very big West Marches project. Nowadays, I run a little bit smaller one, which is more centered around friends playing with friends, basically. But still, even there, we are like, I think, well, it depends on activity of the people, but somewhere between 50 and 100 people. It depends on the season and everything. And even there, you need a lot of tools to help cooperating. You need rules for this kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's rather complex. And as you say, you need stuff that helps people to be engaged in between the games, like downtime.
Yeah, and then that seems to be one of the biggest hurdles for putting one of those together is there's just a lot of prep work that needs to be set up before you can really have a good system for people to play. Is I probably more so, especially if they're random people from the internet. If it's a group of friends, then that's probably a little bit easier to manage.
Yes, it's true. I think the biggest hurdle with these kind of games is actually the social dimension that comes with it, because in the start everybody says like, "Hey, this sounds cool. I want to try that." But then opinions evolve and some people want it to be harder, some people want it to be softer, some people want it to be more lore heavy, some people want more creative freedom, some people think the items are overpowered, other things the items are underpowered. And coordinating that diversion to something that is becomes convergent at some point, I think that is one of the biggest hurdles if you play with more than 20 people in that way.
Do you do anything specific to coordinate that, or do you just have like a here are the general guidelines for this server? So if you like how the server is set up, great, stick around. If not, then you might need to find another server. How does that look?
Well, I wish I had found the perfect solution, but it's harder than people think. I think it requires a constant effort. Obviously, first of all, you need base rules, not game rules, but like base rules of what do we even want to play. What is this supposed to be? What we're playing here, is this supposed to be a living world? Is this supposed to be having fun after work? Is this supposed to be high fantasy, low fantasy, blah blah blah? What tone should it have and everything like that. And once you have that set up, then people have a possibility to decide, do I want to partake in that or not? And but from there on, it takes constant effort, constant, speaking to people, asking them, hey, how do you feel about these changes? This is what we want to propose. This is what the other group proposes. You would start having subgroups emerging. Sometimes that can even get kind of political, not real life political, but like then there will be some that want to play more progressively and some that want to play more traditionally, for example. So yeah, I think having a good team is the key. Having a good team that understands the vision that you want to run and helps doing so and helps resolving conflict, because most of the time is what you do is resolve conflict. This player tried to rob me. This player tried to, I don't know, they were mean to me. Yeah.
That's funny. You also mentioned that you do DM courses. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Okay, yeah. So what I do is oftentimes I run DM courses basically for newer DMs. So I do this on the German D&D community. We are the biggest German D&D server, and I think one of the biggest pen and paper, so the biggest tabletop RPG servers in Germany, one of them, one of three or so. And so we get a lot of new players. So I often try to engage these new players and try to get them to become DMs, which is hard, obviously. So I do courses with them, both like one-on-one workshops where they can basically ask questions and they tell me like, well, I envisioned that there is three goblins making an ambush here, and then I listen to that and give them a little bit of insight while trying to preserve their vision, of course. But then I also do like courses in groups, like how to operate, let's say, Roll20 or Foundry or Game Master Engine for that instance. And then I also do group courses specifically on playing NPCs and doing voice acting and this kind of stuff.
That's really cool. Is that all volunteer or do you charge for that service?
So on the German server, I typically do that for free in a limited scope. So, if there is at least, let's say, 10 people interested, and I would not do it more often than once every 2 weeks or so, you know? And then a lot of people have the possibility to go there and to engage and to have fun, learn something. If I go outside of that, I would either charge people. So then I would have a model like, for example, let's say the course costs $50 or so, but it's split among all people that participate. So if you bring 10 people, it's $5 for everyone. Or on a like donation base where people can just give what they think is appropriate.
Sure. So that's pretty cool. That does seem like a time or a decent time commitment to be doing big sessions like that. So,
Yeah, it is definitely. I mean, I have most of the stuff prepared and everything, but still, people might have very specific questions, and I don't want to tell them like, "Oh, 2 hours are now over. Bye bye." Sometimes
right.
it takes longer and everything, and they have questions. hmm
So what material do you go over with people who go through one of these courses?
Depends on the course, obviously. For the voice acting, I have a whole list of material that I go over. So it's basically a crash course in voice acting. So it goes over voices, it goes over speech, because bigger part than the voices is actually the speech, how you speak. It goes over word choice, it goes over why you would want to voice act, why it would make sense for what would you use that, the actual application as a DM. For example, you might have a dialogue with yourself. which is much more interesting if it's voice acted than if it's narrated, you know. But also you can shift the player's attention. You can even shift the player's attitude towards NPCs without directly telling them this guy is evil, this guy's arrogant, this ruin is interesting. You can do a lot of stuff just by how you present something, present an NPC, present a location, whatever. Yeah, so that easily covers 1.5 hours, and then normally we also have like dialogues, training dialogues going on, where people then try these training dialogues that are pre-written and try to act them in different voices, and then I will give them feedback and tell them what they might do better, what they, just tips and tricks here and there. And for the DM courses, it's basically for the VTT courses, it's like Roll20 Foundry and so on. I tell them the basics. How do you make your first adventure in Roll20, let's say, or your first adventure in Game Master Engine? What can the program do? What can it not do? What do you need to prepare? How does a basic adventure look? Even, don't overdo it. This kind of stuff. Don't prepare for 6 hours if you want to play the first time with your 3 friends who never played D&D before. Go with something small. And then for the one-on-one sessions, it's completely up to the person. They basically get 1 hour of my time. That's it. They can ask whatever they want.
Sure, that makes sense. It sounds like that crash course, especially on the voice acting, would be beneficial to me because I think voice acting is probably my weakest skill as far as a dungeon master goes. So,
Mm. Yeah, and
and
it's
go
definitely
ahead.
a skill. It's not a talent. So it's something you can definitely learn.
For sure. You mentioned Game Master's Engine, so now might be a great time to chat a little bit about that project.
Hmm. Sure.
Do you just want to
Um,
give us like the elevator pitch of Game Master's Engine, and then we'll go in and pick it apart a little bit more?
okay, let's do that. So, Game Master Engine is basically a 3D VTT. So, if you know stuff like Roll20 and these other VTTs, it's basically something like that, but in 3D. That means it's both a map maker and a VTT. So, you can open the program, you can make your own maps from little battle maps, let's say, on a small forest encounter, to huge landscapes and kilometers or miles wide. With, I think, the biggest map that has been built is 4 miles in all directions until now. So that's really big. So you can build these maps, you can create them in all kinds of different flavors, all kinds of different biomes, and whatever you want to do. Get really creative with it. You can then also place minis and tokens and everything on the map for, like, say, encounters and monsters and that kind of stuff. And then you can invite the players over. They don't need to buy the game, actually. They can use the free version for that. And then they can connect to your game and you play together on that map, basically, or on these maps. You can obviously prepare more than one map. So then it becomes like, yeah, very much like Roll20 or so, but it's still in 3D. And a big difference is everything is still modifiable even while you're playing. So, for example, if the players pick a flower, I might delete that flower or pick it. If they chop down a tree, I can put that tree to its side, and then they chop down the tree, and they see the result of that. So that's one of the bigger differences, I think, to the two DVTTs, where you normally have a map, and that map is what is there. End of story.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like a Roll20 or Owl Bear Rodeo or something where, I mean, once you put the map on, it's just the map unless you upload individual images
Yes.
for props and stuff.
Yes. And that means you can only pick up you can only pick the flower. Obviously, in fantasy, you can in imagination, but you can only pick the flower if you put it there to be picked. And that's not the case in Game Master Engine. You can interact with anything because it's never a flat image. It's never an image. It's always single objects that you can interact with.
When you mentioned the like campaign maps that are really huge, is that just are those the same as like a smaller battle map where you can zoom in all the way to like the tree level and like move minis and stuff around, or is it actually like a different scale of map?
Okay. So there are two modes of maps. So you can make hex maps where the hexes are typically bigger than squares, so you can have a larger landscape in that sense. You can also make square maps where you have squares as the basis. But with both, you can either make very small maps or very big maps. And those maps I'm talking about, they're not overview maps. It's not like there are little trees and then stylized houses here and there to signify that there's a village. What I'm talking about is a map that is both an overview if you zoom out very much, but it's also the playing map if you zoom in very much. So those 4 miles I was talking about are actually 4 miles if a mini is about 2 meters high, you know?
Sure. So it's like plopping your game or your miniatures down into like the Skyrim map and just being able to go anywhere without ever
Very,
leaving the map.
very much so. And I mean, if the players eventually come to the edge, well, then you can load a new map. But you know, but that really depends on the playstyle. I've seen a lot of people who use overview maps and then they switch to specific maps like you would traditionally do. I've seen other people who run on very large maps. So yeah, you have very much freedom there to pick the style that you want. There's no right
Yeah,
or wrong.
it would really depend on the gameplay. As a game master, being able to just have, as far as prep goes, just prepping the small battle maps that you need would be a lot easier. But it would be really cool if you had a very sandbox game to just have an entire world essentially that you can play in.
Yes. And the cool thing about it is you can change it afterwards. In principle, it's even possible if I run a game, let's say, it's even possible that you run another game with your 5 players in my game on the same map, on the other edge of the map or whatever.
Right. How many concurrent players can be on a map at a time?
I don't think we ever limited it. So that is something you would have to ask the Steam servers, but I guess many. So we didn't
Until
try yet, but many.
until the server crashes. Okay.
Well, it's a server that is. By the way, these servers they are hosted by Steam for you, so you don't need to host anything, and that means well they have very strong servers, obviously.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect it would be easy to crash their
Yes,
servers.
yes,
So, in regards to the West Marches game, you could have an entire West Marches campaign with multiple groups potentially playing in different areas at the same time.
yes, definitely.
That's pretty cool. I don't know that I've seen another VTT that could support something like that, so that definitely is unique.
Yeah, that's nice. What I can definitely say is that I mean, at least the 2D VTTs will not be able to support it because they use rendered images, and that makes those maps very huge. If you wanted to have such a big map, that would be a JPEG of enormous
Yeah.
extent. While this 4 mile by 4 mile map I was talking about, it's not 4 miles actually. It's I think 16,000 feet. So that might be something around 4 miles or so. That map is 300 kilobytes big.
Wow.
Yeah. Because you have everything installed on your computer already, you download it,
Right.
you have everything. It's just a list of what is where. You can play this with an with a mobile phone connection if you wanted to.
Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking about, like you said, the larger your images get for, a 2D map. I mean, there's a limit to to what size you can even upload to most of those,
Hmm.
and what the browser can display. But yeah, when you have all of the assets, all of the 3D models installed on your computer, I mean, that takes up space, but then the map setup itself is just a collection of, here, these assets are at these coordinates and
Yes,
at this angle and whatever. And
exactly.
then it's all rendered locally, I assume, to
Yes.
whatever that player is viewing. So they're not rendering the entire map at once. They're rendering their whatever they're looking at.
Yeah, well, right now they're rendering more or less the entire map at once. We're using Unreal Engine, and Unreal Engine has built-in stuff for that. So, for example, if a tree is very far away, it will not render the highest quality texture of that tree
Oh,
because you don't see
yeah.
that anyways. But there's definitely, I mean, there's always room for optimization of the graphics and the both stability and how it's called, speed of the graphics. Luckily, right now it's very stable. That is really cool. We have almost no crashes reported in. But obviously, you don't need a super strong PC. You can have a normal laptop, no problem. But obviously, you cannot play this on a complete potato. That's the downside. But you can't play Foundry either on a complete potato.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, for being a 2D engine, Foundry does seem to take a decent amount of processing power.
yes.
And so you mentioned that the players can play for free. So
Mhm.
I downloaded Game Master Engine. I haven't. I've been in it for like 5 minutes. Is about all I was able to look at it.
Mhm.
But you do have a, I guess it's technically like an in-game purchase or whatever for or DLC content for the Game Master.
Yes.
What does that all have? I assume that's just like additional assets and that sort of a thing.
No, no. So how it works is basically you can have the free version, and with that you can play. You can also create maps. So it's right now it's limited to one map. We might open that a little bit so you can make more maps. Doesn't really matter to us. So you can build in the free version, and you have almost all the assets. So it's not like I don't know with many other versions where you have a small pack of assets and then you can buy other ones. Instead, you have almost all the assets. The only limitation is that you cannot host for others with that
Okay.
player version. And if you buy the DLC, which is the Game Master version, then basically you get some assets additionally, but that's not what it's about, but the ability to host for others. Yeah. And then for these kinds of in-game purchases, I know that is always a big topic. Right now, we're not planning on doing any kinds of in-game purchases. Instead, when we update new content, you get it for free. That's it. You bought it once, you get it for free. End of story.
That's really cool. I definitely appreciate having the basic, player version be free because that's always a
Yeah.
hang up on using a system like this. If everybody in the group has to spend, $20 to get something, then the likelihood that all of them end up doing it is a lot lower. So, you know,
Yeah.
having the whoever's running it can just get what they want and run it. That's great.
Yes. So we thought about that quite a big deal, obviously. And this way, I mean, we're not making the most amount of money possible that we could. But on the other hand, it always annoyed us that this, either I have something where I need to, but let's say I don't know, for example, but many others cost like $20 per person, something like that. So that sounds less, but it's actually if we're talking about five people, let's say playing together, that's $100. So either everybody spends $20, that might be super awkward for people because some people can afford that easily and some cannot, but on the other hand, I had this situation, for example, that I was playing in a campaign. The DM wanted to use Tailspire, and he said, well, can you afford that? And some of in our group said, no, I cannot afford that easily. And then he said, well, no problem, I'm just gonna buy it for you, which is nice of that DM. Obviously, it's very nice, but again, that was awkward for that player.
Right. There's that social economic
Yes.
status or weird interaction. Yeah. And it's not fun as a DM either to be put on the spot to say, I either have to tell this person that they can't play in my game, or I have to find a different system, or I have to spend my money to make it so that they can play with us, which is equally as hard, So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Hmm.
definitely like the pricing model, and it's also awesome that you give most of the assets to even the players version as well. So
Hmm.
that's super cool.
Happy to hear that.
How long has Game Master Engine been in development?
So I think we're now a little bit older than 1 year. That is long for. I mean, it's still officially tagged as early access. That is long for an early access game. That is absolutely clear. But on the other hand, we want to deliver a good product. And making a VTT, because there is so many different aspects to it. We we cannot even anticipate what people might try to do and might try to accomplish with a VTT. So that takes a lot of time. So it has been in development for a bit, but it's also a big task. And actually, development right now is rather quick. So every 2 or so months, there's a relatively major update that comes with not like, well, you get one new function, but you get five big new functions, something like that. So luckily, that works out for now.
How does Game Master Engine work with like systems like D&D, or is there any form of like character sheet integration or anything like that?
Hmm. No. So yes and no in that way. We decided for Game Master Engine to not to be system agnostic, and we thought about integrating character sheets and so on, but there's multiple things about it. First of all, if character sheets were so easy in general, then D&D Beyond wouldn't have spent millions and years on it. The character sheets even though if that's I think to the normal user, it seems like character sheet cannot be it cannot be so hard. It must be way harder to make a 3D environment than a character sheet. But those tasks are so completely different from each other.
Right.
Character sheets are actually quite complicated to make, especially if you want to do it right, you know? And however, what you can do is you have a browser in the game. We are now updating the browser to a more stable version, and with that version, you will be able to open, let's say, D&D Beyond or anything like that directly in the game. So you can open it, play with it, or you might use any other service that you want to open a PDF or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, and
That's
we are
actually
also
go ahead.
planning on introducing Beyond 20 into that as well, but
That's
that
pretty cool.
didn't
I
happen.
I wouldn't have thought of just having an embedded browser in the game, but the fact that you can just open one up and then use whatever system or character sheet, online tools that you're used to, you just have them right there in the game without having to, flip between the game and some other screen or something.
Yeah, the thing about that is, so one, the reason that we didn't go and try to tackle that first now is simply because even right now, this browser update will hopefully come in the next version, in the next update. But for now, when I play with Roll20 and D&D Beyond, which a lot of people do that play online anyways, it's just the same. I tap in and out of Roll20 or tap in and out of Foundry. Why wouldn't I do the same with Game Master
Right.
Engine? Just tap in and out or use two screens, you know? And since the game is already running in a windowed mode, I mean, you don't see it looks full screen, but technically it's a maximized window. Tabbing in and out is not a strain on the CPU or anything. So that's the way that most people play right now that use the game.
Right, and leaving it system agnostic then allows people to use it for other systems besides 5th edition D&D as well. That's one of the other challenges I think with when you start integrating character sheets is then it's like, well, how many character sheets do you do? How many game systems do you support?
Yeah, it's unending. It's just unending. One of the ways we could imagine is adding support for players to make their own character sheet types, Like somebody makes a 5e sheet and then uploads it and then everybody can use it. But we're not there yet. So that is definitely something that would need rather careful planning, if
Yeah,
it
I
even
think
comes. So
it gets complex when you're creating a system generic enough to allow people to come in and essentially script their own
yes,
character sheets and formulas and stuff.
yes,
Is there digital dice in the
yes.
engine? That's
There's
one of the
digital dice and dice rolling commands and everything, so you can do all normal stuff in chat if you don't want to use, let's say, D&D Beyond, or if you want to play on paper or whatever. Hmm?
right. Just having those dice there so that everybody can see them is handy. Are there any other features about Game Master Engine that you'd like to mention?
Well, I guess millions. Let me think. Let me think. So my personal favorite is as I said, that the world stays moldable when you play. That you can change stuff while it's running. Another cool thing is that we had to disable this for the last update, but it's coming back now. That you can, it's already been finished actually. That you can build together. So you and me, we could log in onto the same map and build together, which is, I think, quite nice. Especially if you want to have these large maps. I'm not going to fill my MMO style map alone. It takes ages. But if you do it with 3 or 4 players, I mean, look at Minecraft, what people accomplish if there are
Right.
10 of them. It's amazing. Yes. Another thing is, yeah, there is obviously there is help for combats. There is an initiative tracker. There is status condition markers that you can put on the minis and this kind of stuff. All of that is relatively easy. And in general, I would say we try to strive both for. So we go a little bit more in the direction of a realistic, how it's called, realistic graphics. So that's maybe not what you see if you open it for the first 5 minutes, but there's a lot of realistic assets, and you can build very realistic stuff. And the other thing is we try to go for maximum freedom for the players or the map creators. So if something is, we will not stop players from doing shenanigans as long as it doesn't break the game. So lately, for example, I had a lighthouse which has this kind of revolving light on the model, and I flattened it so you can change the dimensions of the objects per dimension. You can say you can change only the height if you want, or only
Sure.
the width, for example. So I flattened it so it had zero height, which most programs wouldn't even allow, and I turned it on its side and used it in a clock as a clock on the wall because it still had that revolving light.
Sure.
Many programs will stop you from doing shenanigans like that. And our philosophy is to not stop you from doing that. As long as it doesn't crash the game, cool, be creative with it.
So I noticed that when I was playing around with it, that when I was placing like walls and stuff, that I could clip them against like together, like they weren't just like snapping in
Oh,
predefined
yeah.
spots. Like it was just exactly where you put it down. And with your freedom thing, I appreciated that. I mean, in certain circumstances, if I'm just building something quick, I would like to have stuff snapped together. But then for very specific things, it's nice to be able to allow objects to clip together so you can get the right lengths and stuff. I think we see that a lot with, like, if you're familiar with Fallout 4 and the building system that they have in
Hmm.
there is pretty rigid. And
Yeah.
then all of the really cool builds that people do are either modded or use these weird glitches to let you just place
Yeah.
things
Exactly.
inside of other things. And
Yes.
that lighthouse example was a good example of that too, where yeah, it's kind of weird in terms of the game engine, but you're still using that model or whatever to make something different that didn't really previously exist. So you can
Yes.
kind of hack things together, which is I would rather have that option than not have that
Yeah.
option.
So basically, in the Game Master Engine, that is standard mode. So you can just push, I don't know, a rock into another rock. It even has procedural text, not procedural. Yeah, it has these textures, specific textures, so that when you put two rocks of the same texture into each other, they look like one rock because the texture is actually in the world, and the objects just move through that texture,
Oh, sure.
so then it looks like out of one piece. But there is also snapping and this kind of stuff. So you can activate Z snapping, which makes objects snap to the ground, or minis, let's say. And in that way, for example, a lot of people have by now started building maps that don't rely on the ground at all. Everything you walk on is objects. And that is actually even good for the performance. Because in Unreal, every object is an object. That means every little tile is just the same as a big rock because it's one object. Not the same, but you know. And that means a lot of people now, build landscapes and mountains and everything just out of rocks. And since the mini can just stick on top of it, easy, no problem. At the same time, you can also, you can activate the grid and snap to the grid if you want that for easy build. Let's say a dungeon. If you want to not spend forever to build that dungeon, just put on the grid snapping and then snap, 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 the walls snap together.
Does the system have any sort of like templates or pre-generated content or procedural content so you could jump in and just like load up a map and just start editing it? Or are they
So
all
it
from scratch?
it doesn't have procedural content or anything like that. So it doesn't do anything for you, the game. But we have started making a collection, which you can find on our Discord server, of maps that other people made, and of which they were willing to give these maps away, and happy to share them actually. And that is also true for the maps that won our mapping contest and everything. So you can download these maps easily and just use them in your own game. And most of the time, that will also help you get the hang of the game. See what other people did and how they did it. And additionally, in general, you can just share maps with each other. Just I can zip up a map I made and send it to you, and you can use it and play with it. So we hope if people do that more. I mean, I'm not making if I use Roll20, I'm not making every map I use. Who does that? Takes forever. Most people just Google some maps. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
And obviously, here you cannot simply Google GME maps, but why not? I mean, we could do that. We could definitely provide a platform that when you Google that, you find our collection. And I think that would make a lot of sense,
right. But
especially if people are happy to supply to that collection.
right. Just having the map sharing so that, because you'll always, with any of these systems, you'll always have people who, fall in love with the system and then they just want to make tons of maps, right? And then
Hmm.
as long as you have a way to share them and they can provide those to people, you have a spot on your Discord for people to share. Yeah, that's really cool. Because if it's I think a lot of times starting from completely blank canvas can be a little intimidating,
Yes,
um,
definitely.
but having something at least visual to say, "Oh, here's some things I can do. I can tweak this a little bit, and then it's perfect." It's a lot easier to
Yeah,
jump in that way.
definitely. And that is something that we definitely want to work on, and we are working on it right now, is to improve the accessibility of the game for newcomers. Because obviously something like Game Master Engine, I mean, it's easy, the game is easy. It's easy for me. But I know it already, It might be hard for somebody who's completely new and they didn't try it out and they don't want to try it out for 10 hours until they get to the results they want. So we are definitely putting a lot of effort right now into tutorials, which we already gave right now, putting those tutorials in the game, giving tutorial maps, giving tutorial videos, giving all this kind of stuff because again, it's easy. It's not actually a high learning curve, but it's a complex program. It's the same as if we say, like, Blender is relatively easy for a 3D program, but 3D programs in general are complicated.
Right.
Photoshop is complicated. And in that way we try to make it as easy and accessible as we can. We're very happy for input on that as well, but it's a complex program that can do a lot of stuff.
Right. Yeah, the more tools that you can give new people to get them up and running fast. I mean, that's probably one of the easiest ways to lose people is if you don't have those tools available, is then, you jump in, you play with it for 10 minutes and you're like, "Oh, this is super complicated. I'll just go back
Yeah,
to using
absolutely.
something
Yeah,
that's easier."
absolutely. That's what we encountered in the past, definitely, and that's why we want to counteract that. Because if you get past a certain point, it's never a problem. But getting past that certain point can be intimidating for some people. But
So
yeah, with the tutorials that we added now, they already help a lot from what we received as feedback.
so switching gears a little bit, do you run a lot of your games in the Game Master engine?
By now, yes. So we have a community game started now on the Game Master Engine Discord. In general, I would say one of the also important features, if you want, in that way, is the good community on the server. So there's a lot of people there. They do stuff together. Everybody can, give their feedback, give their support, ask questions, ask for features. We also have volunteers, volunteering and helping out with the program and this kind of stuff, or doing all kinds of stuff for it, which is really cool, and we really appreciate that. And thank you to all volunteers listening, if any. But yeah, we also have a community game there, which is a kind of like very generic open pool game thing, almost like one of these West Marches games, but way way easier. Way simplified. And yeah, we use Game Master Engine for that all the time. And also in private, I use it very much because I'm not that automatization type of DM, anyways. So I don't really care that I cannot, I don't know, calculate the dragon's breath under disadvantage in the third semester of whatever.
I like the idea of having that community game. That's probably a good way for people to come in and test out the system too and see it run,
Yes.
how it handles an actual game. That's pretty cool.
Hmm. Yeah, and it already gave us a lot of input as well.
User testing is great.
Yeah, basically it's user testing, and the people have fun while doing so. So, yeah, good deal for them, good deal for us.
Cool. I think we're getting pretty close to our time here. So, is there any other topics either about running games or about Game Master Engine itself that you want to talk about before we wrap up?
I think an interesting topic can be why to even use 3D engines, because I think that eludes a lot of people. Why would I even use that? If I want to play, let's say D&D, I want to play a pen paper game. I don't want to play a computer game, and that's very understandable to me. If you actually do, if you do use theater of mind and this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, a lot of games being run online, especially in Foundry, are already like computer games in that way.
Hmm.
Because if I have dynamic lighting and fog of war and doors that I can open and close with a mouse click, we're effectively talking about a computer game. And so in that way, I think what is important to understand there is that not something like Game Master Engine is still a tool, and it's not meant to be a game unto itself. Have you ever played in anything like that? Anything 3D in that way?
That was more of a tool or
No, no, in
or
general. I mean, not 3D games like a 3D game, but yeah, VTTs or something like that.
so I haven't actually used any 3D VTTs yet. Pretty much all of the games that I've either played in or run have been 2D.
That's definitely something that we want to try to understand better why people might, use this or not use this, so we can cater to those people.
Yeah, so I guess thinking of my experience, probably the closest experience I've had is messing around with Tabletop Simulator.
Hmm.
And for me, the controls and stuff of that just feel like really clunky. And it just feels like it's more difficult to play the game or to play anything in it than, being at like a physical table or having a dedicated, digital version of whatever
Yeah.
you're doing. That's probably my main hang up. And then as far as a DM, I haven't dipped my toes into 3D VTTs yet just because it's tends to be more prep than what it takes to prep like a 2D map.
Hmm.
But like you mentioned, I have Foundry and there's a lot of setup that you can do. You can do the map and then you got to draw the walls and the doors and then
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
lighting and
You
stuff
end
and
up with something comparable, actually,
yeah, it
time-wise.
ends up yeah, like I said, I haven't done a 3D one, but with Foundry, you're already getting like the amount of time it takes to prep a map can be fairly high depending on how big your map is and yeah, at that rate, if you can just do it in 3D with about the same effort, then why not?
Yeah, I can say something about that. So when I started with Game Master Engine using it, I did maps on, Incarnate and Dungeon Draft and blah 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 map makers before. It took me about twice as long to come up with a adequate map, not going crazy on detail and flowers on flowers, but normal playable. But by now, it's just the same. It takes the same time amount for me to make a 3D map than to make a 2D map, which I found astounding because it was, that was not what I expected as a user. But it really comes down to that our brains think in 3D, So actually, for something like Game Master Engine, you can be even less artistic than for something like Dungeon Draft or Incarnate or any of these map makers. So I found that very interesting.
That is interesting, but that does make sense because when you're doing something in 2D, you almost have to translate what would it be in 3D
Yep.
now to 2D in a way that on whatever map you're making both looks good and makes sense because it is in terms of your gameplay, you're technically playing in a 3D space,
Yes.
but you're viewing it only in 2D. So
Yes.
there's some weird translation there a little bit. And I guess now that I think about that, you mentioned Dungeon Draft, and I've used that as well. And one of the things that I think about in Dungeon Draft is it's like, oh, should I put all this like random, scatter, stuff or items or objects on it, or should I just leave it blank so that I can add that in,
Deep.
separate so that it can be
Mm-hmm.
interactable? Well, then that's difficult with 2D engines, and you said that with the 3D engine, it's just as easy as modifying it or deleting that object in real time, and that's not easy to do in or in a 2D setup. So
Yeah,
then
that's true.
most of my 2D prep then becomes okay, find the person online that makes the nicest maps that I like that work for me, and then I just use that. But then there's less, there's no tweaking involved then.
Yeah, but because that's one of the things. If I get the great maps that I don't know, Sepeku or these great map makers, that are out there make, and I get one of their maps, super cool. But now there is this one bush. You probably know that feeling. There's this one bush or that one cannon, which is not supposed to be there, and I have to tell the players, no, there is no bush, even if you see it. There's this one stairs or whatever, or the carpet or the one lever that you don't know what to do with because the map comes as it is. And here you don't have that problem. You don't like that tree, just get rid of the tree.
It's always like a random skeleton. Like, oh, Why did somebody die here? Oh, no, the skeleton doesn't exist. Just pretend he's not
Yeah,
here.
exactly, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, and I think that's not a general thing. It doesn't really depend on 2D or 3D. It's rather like you have to imagine. It's like as if you were playing in Dungeon Draft. If the players could move their minis in Dungeon Draft, you
Right.
know, that's what does it.
Right, where you could go in and actually, like, delete pieces of it as
Hmm.
needed, but that's not the flow that you get in Dungeon Draft.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I may have to start trying more 3D virtual tabletops now because you may have changed my mind on it. Well, not that I really had my mind made up before, I just had never used them, so more of a reason to try them.
Yeah. Come over and play together. No
I'll
problem.
have to jump over to your server and get in on the game.
And yeah, and there's one thing I should say as well. In general, I would not necessarily compare those two, 3D and 2D. They do different things. When you play in 2D, it creates something different. It makes the world less tangible, which can be good or bad. I mean, we're playing pen and paper. We're playing a pen and paper game, a tabletop RPG game, instead of running around in the real world and actually hitting ourselves with or hitting each other with sticks. So that level of abstraction can actually be a good thing, in that way.
Right. Yeah.
And here, when you go from 2D to 3D, you're basically making stuff more concrete. So there really is that tree in the distance, and there really is that hill in the distance, and there's no question about it. So you're giving, and there really is a tower in the distance, and you cannot tell to the players if they look around and they say, "What do you see around us?" Then it's up to me in a 2D VT. It's up to me to tell them if there is a tower outside of the map where they can see it, or there is not. Here, they definitely see the tower. So you're giving away control, but you're also giving the players freedom to act on information that is not pre-filtered by your narration, you know? And that has upsides and downsides, and I think that is what makes it so interesting. I like it because I like this open gameplay. I like it when my players are free. I like to be surprised. But that's not true for everybody, so.
Yeah, it's a sliding scale between, like, complete theater of the mind and then also, like, complete concreteness,
Mhm.
and you can be anywhere in the middle, and even with something like this, you could also, in that scenario, like, do I see a tower or something in the distance? I mean, maybe it doesn't exist in the game yet, and you can make the decision to say, yes, you do, and you know, now we got to go build that tower,
Exactly.
either as part of the session or as future prep or something. So you can still have those levels of concreteness versus abstract.
It just depends on your map size. If you make that map, which is just so extremely enormous, people are gonna expect that what they see is what they see. But if your map is only 40 by 40, they don't expect the world to end there, obviously.
Right,
They
right.
say, okay, it's an abstraction.
Cool. Well, I think there's been a lot of really good information and discussion here, so very excited about that. I think now would be a good time to wrap up and go ahead and plug either yourself or online and also the Game Masters Engine socials.
Mhm. Okay, so yeah, so my name is Mark. You can also find me as Cyril, but not much to say about that. If you happen to be German, come over to the German D&D server. I'm going to say that in German now. Die deutschsprachige D&D 5 community, which is the biggest German server on D&D, and you can easily find it by using Google. And if not, but you're interested in Game Master Engine, there we are on Steam. It's easy to find us on Steam as Game Master Engine. We also have a Reddit, which is easy to find as Game Master Engine again. We also have an Instagram account, which is easy to find as Game Master Engine again. And yeah, we have a YouTube channel as well, but it's needs a little bit of updates. Luckily, our great volunteers are working on that. And yeah, obviously we have our Discord channel. Maybe that can come into the description of that podcast here, or whatever. Yeah, but the Discord channel is really the way to engage with us, and that's the way to actually meet us. So if you come to the Discord channel, you can talk to our lead programmers, you can talk to me, for example, and there's no writing 70 letters and 60 formulas or whatever. Just come and meet us. We are very, very open to actually meet you guys and girls and everything. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.